Professor Liu, in your view, how will Trump's policies this time round in his second term, how might they differ to the first term?
I think for one, the 47th Trump administration, I think the focus still would be the rivalry between the United States and China. And adding to that, I think right now the general public in the United States, most of them, actually more than 75% of the respondents in a given survey, say that China is more like the United States challenger, if not enemy. So I think for the general public in the United States, they are actually having a suspicion and doubts of China. So I think this can constitute a base for the Trump administration to conduct more confrontational or competitive policy against China. So I think this is quite important. And this is also probably in Taiwan's interest. But in the meantime, we still need to be able to discern Taiwan's interest and the United States' interest on this matter. So I think in the following few months, maybe during the transition in the United States, I believe our government will try our best to engage with the relevant discussions with their counterparts in the United States.
Right, okay. And Chieh-Ting, staying on Taiwan, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense reported a significant increase in Chinese military activity around Taiwan. This was the day before the US election on Monday, 4th of November, and there were 44 Chinese planes, 37 of those that crossed the median line in the Taiwan Strait, along with 6 ships. In your view, what was the message behind this and the timing?
Well, I think just instinctively, I don't know how connected the two events are. But of course, we know China has been doing these kind of incursions almost on a daily basis. They're very consistent about it. And I think at the very least, the message they want to send is just because the US is having an election doesn't mean we're taking a break. So.
Okay, so the pressure is still on Taiwan. Okay, now in recent months, Beijing has embarked on a charm offensive seeking to mend relations, particularly with US allies. This includes the détente with India and the UK, a fresh start with Japan, as well as lifting an Australian lobster ban. So Professor Liu, can we explain China's move away from its wolf warrior diplomacy or more combative diplomacy as kind of trying to cushion the hard bump of a Trump presidency, and it's been called Trump insurance by some media.
Yes, I think for the Chinese side, they began to realize that this kind of wolf warrior diplomacy is actually counterproductive, not helping China to get what China really wants. But of course, having said that, we all know that why China is conducting this kind of foreign policy, that is because it serves the CCP's political interest in ruling in China. So having said that, I think it is quite important to point out China right now is doing this kind of things because China is trying to drive a wedge between the United States and its allies. We all know that under the Biden administration, Biden actually somehow shift the traditional hub and spoke alliance system in the Indo-Pacific and turning that into a lattice work alliance. So for that, it relies more on partners and allies. So China is taking certain kind of advantage on this kind of new format in the Indo-Pacific region. China is trying to say, okay, if you are on your own, you are on not on the share the burden with the United States, then maybe you can take China as a better alternative to the United States. However, unfortunately, I think this is not actually to China's advantage because many countries in the world right now, even though they agree that maybe China should have a seat on the negotiating table on world affairs, but most of them still do not see China as a better alternative to the United States.
Okay. And Chieh-Ting, why might that be the case?
Well, I think in this case, with the Trump incoming administration, there is a lot of talk about how perhaps more isolationist or perhaps less of a focus on sort of the lattice work or the ally system that President Biden had put in a lot of effort to strengthen, right? So I think in this case, my take is that China is actually trying to sort of get a head start talking to these other countries if and when President Trump starts to create more friction, where there's some friction or conflict.
Which ones in particular?
So, for example, we know that the United States and Japan, right, and the United States and the Philippines, right, and also we know that from the first Trump administration, there's a lot of talk about NATO, about the President Trump saying NATO countries have to kind of pay more, right? So I think China now kind of sees maybe a slight opportunity to say, hey, if there is some problem that you experience down the road with the United States, in comparison, we look like the more reasonable of the two, right? I think in the short term, the kind of perceptions are not going to change that much, but I think for China, at least, we know that they're trying to sort of revise their direction a little bit.
Yeah, and so Professor Liu, how do you read the fact that China is actually taking the EU to the WTO over the 45% tariffs on Chinese EV imports? The EU is surely one of those US allies that China should be, turning on the charm offensive with and trying to pull over to its side.
Yes, I think at this moment, China was doing this because China wants to have EU to be sitting on the negotiating table. So I would say this is more like China using WTO's claim as a leverage against EU. So I believe in the months to come, maybe they will strike a compromise on those kind of disputes, especially commercial disputes. And what struck me as more important is, for example, the diplomatic engagement between China and the UK in the past few months. I think that is more worth noting. For example, because right now they have a new government in UK, so China was trying very hard to re-engage with the Starmer government. And also the foreign minister maybe visiting Beijing in the months to come. So we know that they actually had this kind of more and more engagement over the past few months. So I believe Beijing was trying to say that, okay, let's see, even though we have disputes, we can still work things out. Right. So we are not like the United States. They are so stubborn. They are not thinking of you. They are not in your interest. So just engage with us.
Okay. And Chieh-Ting, that would play into China's hands then with a Trump presidency that would raise a blanket 20% tariff on all imports into the US, which is what Trump had said during his campaign, and 60% on China. According to Bloomberg estimates, the change in 2028 on goods imported into the US, China would experience an 87% cut and EU 52%. So it would seem that it would be a good time for China to be reaching out, as Professor said, to US allies who will equally feel pain, but not equally, but will also feel pain.
Right. So I think with kind of on the campaign trail, right, and I think this is a hallmark of former President Trump's the way of speaking, right? So he kind of throws out these kind of numbers and outlandish numbers, and whether he really means them or not, they become the talk of the town, right? Because people they're shocked, and then they have to talk about whether how realistic all of these numbers are. But I think it is true that for European leaders, they have been kind of watching these things with a lot of anxiety, right? And so I think this is a good sort of opportunity for Beijing to say, if in case this happens, Beijing wants Europe to think about kind of hedging their bets a little bit.